On this episode, we cock an ear spaniel-like in the direction of some of the best guests we've ever had here on Audiobook Club.
Including Ben Folds.
My sound man tells me it was twice that I performed it thrice.
Yes.
Knobhead. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just bad behavior.
Ben MacIntyre.
What I tend to do, Matthew, is I take these stories that people think they know. You know, Second World War as a whole, if you like, but you know, Operation Mincemeat and the double crossing in the Second World War, and even the Philby story are things that people often, particularly people of our age, have at the sort of periphery of their understanding. But actually those stories are much, much more complicated and much more interesting than the ones we think we know.
Jeff White.
North Korea's government hackers are accused of increasingly working with the worlds of organised cybercrime and indeed organised street-level crime, because hacking's just the start of it. You know, if I hack into your bank account, Steve or Matt, and I get the money, great. But where am I going to put it? I can't just transfer it to Jeff White because it's going to be obvious it was me who nicked it.
Aaronovitch.
There's been a lot of stuff where people who were introduced to the supernatural spent like 2 or 3 episodes or half a book running around going, no, it can't be real, it can't be. And I was really bored of that. So I thought, fine, I'm just going to do a character who goes, oh, magic's real, all right.
And Dirk Maggs.
I was trying to get the sound effect of a shovel hitting somebody's head, and the effect of the actual shovel just wasn't ringy enough. So we rigged a mic in the middle of the stage at the Paris, and then Stuart Silver and I stood about 20 feet apart and threw a gong at each other.
Audiobook Club with Steve Phillips and Matthew Layton.
Hello and welcome to Audiobook Club, the podcast about audiobooks that believes that guests are like fresh fish. They go off after 3 days. Well, they certainly do after speaking to us. As we go back into our little treasure trove, Matt, nice time of year to sort of look back and share just a few of the highlights of who we've had on, eh?
Yeah, I think we've definitely been punching above our weight. We've had some big names on, obviously Ben Folds, the piano playing rock and roller, Ben MacIntyre, who we read everything he does, and I'm looking forward to watching SAS Rogue Heroes over the holiday period. Then we've got Jeff White, who basically it was an audiobook about a podcast, wasn't it? And that was quite an interesting one. Yeah.
Thankfully, it became a book and then an audiobook. Thank goodness.
So that was the one about the North Korean government stealing money out of bank accounts in various ways around the world. Ben, now I have to correct us on this. The Rivers of London series books written by Ben Aaronovitch. I don't know if you've encountered that recently.
I've not encountered that, no. I've always called Ben Aaronovitch, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
So he did, we did, they did, Cobner did. The books are read by Cobner Holbrook Smith. And yeah, so in the last 2 books, he's not called Ben Aaronovitch anymore. He's called Ben Aaronovitch. So I think there's probably a reason for that. Probably best we don't tread into that editorial minefield.
Well, I'm hoping he'll come back on, actually, because we were talking to him while he was in the International Space Station, it sounded like, with the line.
There were technical issues. We were told Mr. Aaronovitch didn't do Skype or something, and I ended up holding 2 telephones up against a microphone. And then your favourite guest, I think, is... the greatest audiobook producer of all time, Dirk Maggs. So we've done quite well, haven't we?
We have done quite well. Let's get straight into it then. So first of all, Ben Folds, tell us about how the interview came about, and then we'll get straight into a big chunk. We're going to basically play big chunks of our chats with our guests here. So Ben Folds then, Matt.
So I've been a Ben Folds fan since he existed. He emerged in about 1996 with his band Ben Folds 5. They were a 3-piece band. Thereby begins the humour. And he seems to have managed to draw out his career, reinventing himself along the way. He, at the time, I was living in Adelaide in Australia. And he, like me, had been a father to twin children in Adelaide, and he's every time he comes back, he's treated like a reigning hero in that town. But strangely, there aren't many media commitments in Adelaide, so we asked and we received. And while he had nothing else to do, we met in the bar of his hotel in the centre of town, and he was just brilliant.
I had dental work the day before I did the audiobook, and I had no idea it would be so difficult to talk through the little stitches in your gums and stuff. It was really hard. And I think I had one of the best producers in the business. And he was getting me through it, and we'd start, salt water, start, and just keep doing it. And I don't know if for some reason, maybe I felt better on the day that chapter 17 was up and I went, or if I realized, oh, this is more, I have no idea. I just kind of took it as it came. And we had a little keyboard there, and I could do that. And I accidentally found that little terrible Seinfeld bass sound, which I played with until I got sick of that and moved on to something else. But,
the Seinfeld bass, which I believe is not actually a bass on the Seinfeld tune either, it's a keyboard as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's fun to use that.
To the content of both the book and the audiobook, I mean, Cheryl...
the content.
The content. What you actually
bit.
said.
Yes.
Cheryl has copious notes, don't you, Cheryl?
Well, I tend to take a lot of notes. The beginning of it was very foundational, and I have to say, living through the same era you lived through in an area that was behind everybody else, and catching fireflies and putting them, actually they're lightning bugs, they're not fireflies, but in jars, holes by the bedside, waking up, they're dead. You're like, what did I do? And I start letting them loose in the house.
Leave grass inside the jar.
No, I didn't. And I'd let them loose in the house, and my parents would get furious. But no, it was very relatable. And I think one of the things that we've seen when we've listened to some of the other books that people have written of their own lives is they're not as honest. And I think that's what really resonated most for me, is that there was a true honesty and a true foundation that really builds up to help everyone understand a bit more about your style and your music. And
thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I take it as the highest compliments. All it really needed to do was be honest. So that's good, especially coming from a Southerner of probably a good 10 or 20 years after me, but we'll say rough contemporaries within decades.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Yes. That's cool. You know, I read a book one time. I was running to the airport. I love Muhammad Ali biographies, and I don't know how many I've read. I don't know. It could be 20. I don't know how many of them there are. But I was running to the airport. It was actually Heathrow, and late for the plane. I was like, Jesus, I'm going to be on the plane for a long time. I need to grab a book. And I thought, the Tao of Muhammad Ali. Yeah. Grabbed that, got on the book, got on the plane, started reading. I was like, man, this guy's description of his hometown is so universal, so perfect, honest, just it all unfolded in front of me. It sounds like my hometown. Page 5 or something like that. Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The guy was from my hometown, which was hilarious. He ran the Blockbuster around the corner from my house. I think I remember this guy. Isn't that funny? Fantastic.
Yeah. What was it? Blockbuster back then? It was called something else.
One day it'll all be Laserdisc.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, God.
Go back in time.
The word that jumped out at me from that part of it is also a word that I've heard you use in what is undoubtedly my favourite cover version of all time ever.
Bitch?
No, Tourist.
Tourist, right.
Yeah.
So I only really understood Pulp's Common People when I heard the Shatner version and heard the words independent of it.
Right.
Seems to me, am I putting too much meaning on a song that reflects your upbringing, or is that just a happy coincidence?
Oh, no. I think that song is just probably the most incisive pop song about that particular class divide. Pulp's Common People. Absolutely. Jarvis absolutely nailed it. I think it's his best song. It's just a beautiful song because the tourism part is the wonderful part of it. I mean, and it's a good way. And, I took it and ran with it a couple steps further and considered the camera around the neck and the whole thing. And if you're going to observe, if you're a tourist and you go through a town that's not your place, some people are bad tourists and other people are good tourists. And when you consider it as a matter of class, that resonated with me the first time I heard that song, and was the reason, probably the reason I wanted Shatner to cover that song. Yeah. Because I always thought it should be a big hit in the States. But the problem with the U.S. is that, the problem. There's a problem with the U.S., at least the way that we look at social structure, is that there is a definite class system, but we think there's not, because we like to think that class might be synonymous with wealth, and it's not. And people just don't understand that. And because of that, they turn a blind eye to things that are just so divisive in our in culture. In the South, Atlanta being one of those cities, you can be from, I'm going to say, just maybe 10 places in the U.S. that has an actual old money class. Yeah. That you can draw the lineage back probably to Great Britain, in some way, England. And that is so rare that so much of the U.S. isn't accustomed to seeing it or knowing about that. And I felt very lucky to grow up having that as part of the background. It's an interesting, and the same would be true in Atlanta. It's the FOA area,
Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Folds there. And from one Ben to another, in fact, we're quite packed with Bens during this episode of our Best of the Guests, Ben MacIntyre. Now, we've done a couple of his books, haven't we? And they have both been amazing, Colditz and the Siege. And again, you skipped along and spoke to him.
Yeah, I think these are the books that you and I have been pleasantly surprised by. And I think they're the ones where you and I both point in the same direction. I think we both agree that Ben MacIntyre's way of writing is the way he takes people's diaries and all sorts of reference sources and makes films for your mind. How do you put it, Steve?
Well, it is movies for your mind, isn't it? I mean, not actually my phrase came from Dirk Maggs, to be honest with you, who is popping on later in this show. But yeah, it basically the mind. This is why we love radio, isn't it? The pictures are the best on radio. And Ben MacIntyre, with not only his pen but also his voice, the way he performs his books, just really creates a massive movie in your mind. You really get the scale of real life events like Colditz and like The Siege and others.
Yeah, so he was on a freebie again when I was living in Adelaide. He went down there to a book festival. I think he was on a jolly, to be honest with you. And as usual in Adelaide, he didn't have much to do. So again, another interview recorded in the public area of a hotel. So forgive the sound quality. But he was just a superhuman being. I think I still remember he was so good at everything he did, so engaging, so welcoming. And even managed at the end to tell me to piss off in a nice, polite way.
Yeah, escaping from Colditz was something that many of those prisoners tried to do and thought obsessively about. But it's not the whole story of Colditz. It's just one element, really.
It was the thing that jumped out at me was the whole idea where you say not everyone that didn't want to be there was British, no. But in terms of the guards as well, obviously many other nationalities, but of course all the guards and their families, they didn't particularly want to be there either.
No, well, the guards in a way were, they were as much prisoners of Colditz as anybody else, and two of them committed suicide. It was a tough place to be, Colditz, particularly for guards towards the end of the war when they were much more malnourished than the prisoners. So you had that strange moment when they had no food, the guards, and so therefore they were susceptible to bribery by the prisoners because the prisoners were still getting Red Cross passes. So you've got a sort of weird way in which this funny internal artificial society in Colditz is sort of turned on its head by the end.
So the thing that got me was, at one point you mentioned there are about 1,000 people on the campus. And I went, my frame of reference, having two 11-year-old kids, is that's about the size of a secondary school.
Yeah.
And all of this myth comes from somewhere that is the size of a there's not that many people there in many ways.
There's not that many people, and for long periods, Colditz had many fewer people than that. I mean, at the beginning, there were only about 250 prisoners. So it was, and there were twice as many guards at one point as there were prisoners. So it became a kind of German barracks come prison. It was an odd place, and it sort of changed over time. We sort of, again, the myth holds that, Colditz was one thing for the whole of the war. It wasn't really. I mean, it adapted and it adopted different elements of the culture as it went along. So it's a strange and evolving community, Colditz.
Yeah. I think a question I only heard this question the second time that I listened to the book. And the question that you ask in the prologue is, what would you have done? So, what would you have done?
Well, it's a really good question. And of course, it's an unanswerable question, because when you're in these circumstances, and the same is true of espionage, when you're thrust into this situation that you have no control over, you don't know when it's going to end. You may be a prisoner forever. You may be killed inside the prison. It's not like a sort of civilian prison where you can chalk off the days on the wall.
You know how long there is to go.
Right.
Yeah.
You have no idea how long you're going to be there. So that lends a particular kind of atmosphere to the place. And there were so many different sorts of... I am going to answer your question in a second.
No, hurry.
So many different sorts of people. There were those who were utterly dedicated to escaping and thoroughly prepared to lose their lives in the attempt. There were those who were very happy to help people escape and help manufacture false papers and make ropes out of sheets and so on, all the sort of ancillary work, as it were, that goes into escaping. There were those who were perfectly happy to spend the time putting on plays and writing plays in some cases, and acting and dressing up and generally doing that. Others wrote. Some quite good bits of literature came out of Colditz. I think I would have been one of those, I suspect.
Yeah, I think that's...
Well, I'm not sure I'd been that one, because I think what I might have... There was a good library in Colditz. I mean, there was a good, steady supply of really interesting books were coming in. I think I might have been one of those that just sat there and read their way through the war. I'm not sure I would have been one of those scaling off the chapel roof or building a glider. I'm not sure I'm made of that stuff.
If I may say, I think the only way that I would end up in Colditz, because obviously I wouldn't have qualified for the army because I can't see very well,
right,
is in my role as the useless third son who gets sent to the clergy. I think that's
well, interesting, because of course the clergy inside Colditz, and there were a sort of clerical group in there, were some of those who were, and I don't want to exaggerate this, but they had a captive congregation. And for some of them, particularly this Methodist minister whose story I found absolutely fascinating. I mean, I wouldn't say he enjoyed it.
You tell it very well.
I don't say, well, thank you, but I don't say he enjoyed it, but actually he was in control of the kind of spiritual future of a flock whose trials he was sharing. For him, that was almost a kind of Christian experience and a Christian
purpose
and a meaning. And actually, after the war, he was one of those who found it really, really hard to find another purpose. So I just think the whole question of what would you do, I guess it's the sort of subtext in a way of almost everything I write, actually. I mean, I think even and perhaps particularly the spy stuff, because those really are stories where individuals are kind of caught up in a wider story that they probably can't control and have to make very, very difficult moral decisions inside situations that are ethically fluid and sometimes very ambivalent. So I think, I try to keep at the back of my mind that I'm saying to the reader, come into this world with me. Let me introduce you to a story that you may not know. But at the bottom of it, try and put yourself in the same position as some of these people, and you work out what you would do.
So that's Ben MacIntyre, and did he mention what he's working on next after the siege?
Do you know what? I haven't had a look. He hasn't spoken to us recently. We don't have the advantage of him being trapped in the middle of the desert and at our mercy, but we'll certainly cover whatever he does in 2025.
On from one real-life event in terms of the siege, and of course Colditz as well, to another one in the world of cyber attacks and cyber threats, and Jeff White, who really really hit the big time with the Lazarus heist, the podcast about the North Korean hack and Sony and all the rest of it. The story is absolutely incredible. It will blow your ears off, and it will certainly make you update your security patches on your phones as well as your computer and change all your passwords as well. Don't let them in. Jeff White spoke to us about Lazarus heist. He spoke to us about this murky world of cyber, and what a fascinating man, Matt.
Yeah, I like the way that this is actually genuinely an audiobook derived from a podcast. The original podcast went out on the BBC. He and his co-presenter, they're beautifully crafted episodes with a haunting soundtrack, loads of diverse voices, and again, a fundamentally interesting and maybe slightly alarming story about the professional hackers who live in North Korea. But we managed to get him because he was trying to promote the audiobook version or the audiobook that stemmed from the podcast.
So the story of the Lazarus heist is basically how North Korea's accused of becoming a global cyber superpower. Because there is an intriguing question, I think most people know a little bit about North Korea, and one of the things they do know is that this country is pretty much sealed off from the outside world, and certainly for the vast majority of its citizens, it's sealed off from the internet. The things that you and I take for granted, nipping out, maybe buying a laptop at Argos, phoning up a broadband provider and getting online, that's completely unthinkable in the vast majority of cases in North Korea. So how does this country of all countries become a sort of top 4 threat to the UK? If you ask the UK's intelligence community, they'll say, our threats on cyber are in positions 1 and 2, either Russia or China, and in positions 3 or 4, either Iran or North Korea. How did North Korea end up in the top 4? And so the Lazarus heist is the story of that, how that stuff works, the targets they've been going after, how they work, and indeed why they actually do all of this stuff. And it's a really sort of fascinating story.
Yeah, it goes. I mean, thank you for taking me to the Philippines, to Sri Lanka. The characters include grizzled undercover FBI agents, strange women who somehow are in charge of international charities. How did you pull it all together? I mean, I love the way you tell stories, but it's an incredible piece of work. How did you maintain focus and decide where to build it?
Well, in a way that usefully it does unfold chronologically, this story, and that's the best way to tell a story. You start at the beginning and you end at the end. So we start the podcast in series 1 with the Sony hack. Then we go on to talk about Bangladesh Bank, which was targeted for $1 billion. Then WannaCry, the ransomware attack, came in 2017. And for series 2 of the podcast, which we're working on at the moment, we'll be going on from that and basically moving on forward. And for the book that I've written, it pretty much does that. It goes chronologically. What you're looking for is the sort of through line, the kind of narrative. And one of the key sort of through lines, one of the key sort of plot lines, if you like, in this, for me, and particularly that I've tried to explore in the book, is how North Korea's government hackers are accused of increasingly working with the worlds of organized cybercrime and indeed organized street-level crime, because hacking's just the start of it. If I hack into your bank account, Steve or Matt, and I get the money, great, but where am I going to put it? I can't just transfer it to Jeff White because it's going to be obvious it was me who nicked it. So hacking's just the start of it. You've then got to have a plan or a system for getting the money out and laundering it and washing it around the world so it can't be traced. And that's where you end up butting up against organized crime gangs, because that's what they do day in, day out. So there's been a really interesting confluence between the nation state stuff and, as I say, the organized crime gangs. And that's where I think the running is for me as a journalist.
What I wanted to drill down into, because it's my area of geekery, is what is the difference between an audiobook and a podcast?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've sort of been asked about this recently and thought quite a lot about it. The key thing for me with the podcast is the voices in it, the people telling the stories. I think I'm of the opinion that the era of journalism that we had, where Mr. Journalist, it was usually Mr. Journalist, stands up and says, "Oh, this is the news. This is what has happened today," wearing their tie and their suit. I just feel that era is increasingly anachronistic. I think the future for it is finding the people who can tell the stories, who are there, and getting them to tell their stories in their own words. I think that's sort of the future. And so I think that's why podcasting is very satisfying. The job of the podcaster, for me anyway, what I feel my job is work out what the story is, work out who was in the room, find them, and get them to talk to me and tell the story. And that's it. If you can do that, you're on to a winner. Because from a podcast editing point of view, you can just let that tape run. You can just say, here's Mr. Such and Such or Mrs. Such and Such. They're going to talk about what happened. Off you go. And you can just run that tape and just, it really helps you editing the podcast to just stay with one person and let them tell their story. It's brilliant. So that's what I feel is important with podcasting, and finding those voices and getting the best out of those voices, and being quite human about that. With the book, it's far more structural. You're far more putting the story together. You're far more guided by the bits of the narrative and the twists and turns and so on, because you don't really need, it's nice to have good quotes in a book, but you can't, in a book, you're not just going to run quote after quote after quote like you are on a podcast. So you're far more emphasizing on the sort of structural points, the kind of twists and turns. And so the stuff that I wrote in the book that the editors at Penguin said, well, that doesn't really work, take that out. One story in particular is a story of Virgil Griffith, who's an American who went to Pyongyang for a cryptocurrency conference of all things, and was then arrested by the US and imprisoned for having helped North Korea evade sanctions. It's, crazy story and loads of twists and turns. I thought it was fascinating, put it in the book. The editor said, no, it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. It's take it out because it's getting in the way of the narrative. So, but that will feature hugely in series 2 of the podcast. We're going to do a lot on that. So there's different ways of doing things in the book and the podcast. The other thing that's nice about the book is it's all my own words. It's all my own voice. It from an ego point of view and from a control freak point of view, it's great because you just sit there writing and it's your words, it's your voice. And you've got so much, you've got more autonomy with the book, I think, as a journalist than I've ever had with any other project. I think that's why I quite enjoyed writing both of them, both the Lazarus Heist book that's coming out and crime.com that came out a couple of years ago.
And was your editor right?
Yes, they generally are. Editors bring, one of my editors at the BBC talked about was the joy of ignorance, which is they don't know the story, so they just listen to it and can, from a completely outsider's point of view, say, actually, that's not the interesting bit. The interesting bit is the bit you put at the end. So yeah, they were annoyingly, they were right at Penguin.
So from Jeff White, we move back into the world of fiction now. Ben Aaronovitch.
Very good.
Thank you very much indeed, and apologies, Ben, for mispronouncing it.
I say that
down
too.
The years.
I say that too.
Oh, to be honest, down the years, from when I first read in Doctor Who magazine in 1987, he was going to be one of the writers on the next series of Doctor Who, where he did the seminal Remembrance of the Daleks. I really advise you get the 25th anniversary or 25th season box set of that with new effects and everything. Anyway, enough about Doctor Who.
Put it away, Steve. Put that back put that down.
Don't touch that. Put that back.
Put that back. There's no need to show everybody else, Steve. Some things should stay secret.
A bit late for that now. But Ben Aaronovitch, of course, after all that, went on to create an amazing detective series called Rivers of London. You love these books, Matt. So you talk us through what makes Rivers of London so great, and also Ben himself.
The Rivers of London series of books are. I really look forward to them coming out. Again, it was one of the things in my beginning of reading audiobooks where it got me addicted to it. Basically, it doesn't mess about. It starts off as a procedural police drama with Cobner Holbrook Smith in the lead role, playing a police officer, and then in paragraph 3. There's a headless body and a ghost, and it doesn't muck about. He throws you straight into it, but it's very much based in London and real parts of London that I can identify with. I'm entirely addicted to the series. He was very nice to us. As I said, we ended up recording this. Mr. Aaronovitch doesn't do Skype or something, so we ended up with me holding up in Australia, holding 2 mobile phones up to a microphone so you and he could talk to each other. The quality of the audio in this is appalling. We apologise, and hopefully we'll get him ahead of the launch of his next book.
My motto is always take care of the text the subtext will take care of itself. And so therefore I tend to just think I will write this, and then I tend to go like the next thing that logically happens, or I go, oh, the story goes here and then the story goes there, and I don't think about it in terms of like a unified theme or something, or I'm trying to make a point or engage. I love that thing where it's like engages, interrogates the nature of modern society. No, I don't interrogate the nature of modern society. I just have does magic in How is the Cop.
Good. Well, that pulls up both of our next questions then. Number one was, how much do you care about a story arc you've worked on Doctor Who and Blake 7? And the second one was, you walk the walk in terms of tolerance. You don't talk the talk. All your characters come from different ethnic backgrounds, and, you've even got, anti-ageism. Anti-ageism and anti-facial disfiguration, which are both key, but that's not deliberate then. You're just looking around you and drawing evidence from there.
Well, I mean, I'm from London, so, you're from London. So, I mean, for me, I grew up in a mixed area, mixed school. The first all-white institution I ever worked in was the BBC.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a shock. You walk in and everyone's white. Ah! It's a bit of a surprise. And and one of the things was that I was working in television. I'm working on things like Blake 7, and you're under pressure from external pressure to whitewash the cast as much as possible. And when I came to Rivers of London, it was like, yes, finally, I'm writing a novel. No one can tell me what colour anyone is. So therefore, I just got to do what I wanted. But I didn't intentionally. I mean, I have done some things. Like I was very, very rocky on kind of things like transsexualism and stuff like that. So I've gone a bit of a steep learning curve, and there are things that I have become aware of that I have added, but I don't add them in a kind of very conscious way. I don't say to myself, right, I'm going to do this because I didn't make Peter mixed race because I thought, I must make Peter mixed. There was no point where Peter Grant was white. There was a point where he was black and a woman, but there was no point where he was white.
Well,
so, it wasn't like I was thinking to myself, I must do this and I must do that. It's just, he just turned up that way. I mean, and there's a lot of characters like Sarah Lee, who Detective Sergeant, we should call her, Sarah Lee. Don't want a spoiler. She becomes a Detective Sergeant later.
No.
Who literally, I just needed a character to walk down the stairs with Peter, and I thought, quick, character, Marley, good job. Okay, right, go. I didn't think she was going to last more than like half a page. And now I can't get rid of her. And I knew nothing about the Somali community at that time. So I had to go out and do research. You get hoisted by your own petard sometimes. You just end up having to go out and do research that you weren't expecting to have to do. Because a character just comes along and then won't leave. And my books are full of that. I just sit there going, oh God, not another bloody character.
Well, as you know, we're audiobook people, and for me, a really important part of Rivers of London has been it's not a reading; it's a performance by Cobner.
Yeah, he's very, very good.
He is Peter Grant, isn't he?
Yes, he's very, very good. I mean, I didn't choose him myself, but I did sort of put out the parameters for who I said you're going to have to get a black guy to do it. Because no white character actor, however good, is going to be able to do all the various kind of West African variations. and I said it probably needs to be in London, and they got someone from Birmingham. But there you go.
Oh, but again, at the end of one of the books, it's somewhere 4 or 5, I can't remember which. There's an interview where you and he are dragged into Audible's studios, and it just feels like he's your muse now to a certain extent. From what you said of the organic way this has come together, I mean, there's an audiobook only book in the series. Was that influenced by, as you say, you didn't set out to do that? Was that just because of what Cobner did with the form and you enjoyed the form, or were you aware of audiobooks before?
No, it's just, I mean, the thing is, if he was doing a bad job, right, I wouldn't want to do an audio-only short story. So it's like these things are interactive. These things are kind of never like clear-cut kind of things. So, when he started, I didn't know that his version of Nightingale would be the version of Nightingale that would reverberate in my head whenever I'm writing Nightingale. And when he started, he didn't know that telling me how many accents he could do would mean that I would spend my time trying to find accents to trip him up with.
Ben Aaronovitch there, and our last guest, well, I mean, he has been involved in some of the most seminal works you hear of the spoken word on audio, to be honest with you. And I think it came across in the interview. I was I felt like a bit like they had a split image puppet years ago of Alistair Burnett fawning over the royal family. That's the way I felt, to be honest, when we interviewed him. But the guy's a legend, Dirk Maggs, who is the brain and the creativity behind bringing Neil Gaiman's The Sandman to Audible. Before that, what a track record, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on radio. If you ever follow him on X or Blue Sky, I think he's mainly on Blue Sky now, some of the stuff he puts out on there, the memories he puts out, the people he worked with. Your view, Matt?
The greatest audiobook producer of all time.
I was trying to get the sound effect, this is very Milligan, of a shovel hitting somebody's head. And the effect of the actual shovel just wasn't ringy enough. So in the end, we came up with the idea of maximum shoveling damage. So we rigged a mic in the middle of the stage at the Paris, and then Stuart Silver, who'd written this particular series, and I stood about 20 feet apart and threw a gong at each other. So ideally, the gongs would collide in front of the mic. And it really worked.
But that's the thing, isn't it? I remember working on an ad, strangely enough, for Cointreau when they're allowed to do booze on the radio at a much lower level than you. The Scotch glass we used didn't sound Scotch glassy enough, and we ended up using a vase, I think, at the time.
Yes.
It's the ability to make a mistake that helps you get it right in the end, doesn't it? It's like, that's not quite shovel on the heady enough, let's use a gong. I mean, it's that.
Yeah, you do.
It's the freedom to be able to do that.
And what people don't, what people coming into the business take things at face value, and that's the last thing you should do. So, for example, they will think, I was trying to think what it was, but there was, for example, the old BBC sound effects where a dinosaur was that lovely little man who used to do animal impressions roaring down a glass tube going like that. And of course, then you see Jurassic Park and you see what Gary Rydstrom has done with it. And he's basically combined about 68 different animals, from badgers to hippos. And in the middle of it somewhere, somebody's pushing a wardrobe across a unvarnished wood floor, and there's this, this huge sound effect. And it's this thing of never ever settling for the obvious. You have to expand it and so on. And there are so many times Sandman is full of sound effects which aren't what they said on the label. It's full of stuff. And so many times, I have a real thing about footsteps. I absolutely can't bear artificial sounding footsteps, and so much of the keyboard Foley footsteps that people use sound like, I don't know, somebody tapping a nail in somewhere. It's the weirdest it's totally unsympathetic to its environs. And the best footsteps I ever recorded were at the end of a long day in Maida Vale 7 at BBC Maida Vale in 1990 when we were doing Superman. And I desperately needed some Foley footsteps for Lex Luthor. And in those days we were on reel-to-reel, so there was none of this digital lark. And I just ran in the studio with my boots on, my cowboy boots, which I usually wear, and just walked up and down a couple of times and then ran up and down a couple of times on this parquet flooring, which was the flooring of the studio. Well, I have used those footsteps ever since. Those are so.
Have we heard them recently?
Footsteps. Yeah, they're all over. Every time James walks about on a hard surface, it's usually him. In fact, anybody. And the real joke is that is probably, if you were to time it back to back, those footsteps that I did, there's less than a minute. And they're and individually probably about 10 seconds, run off, run back, shuffle a bit, and so on, because they blend. And the fact that no one's ever called me out on them persuades me that they really do blend. So it's quite an interesting thing. And another thing, if I can elaborate about sound effects, is I think it's more like impressionist painting than photography. Because I think if you're trying to suggest that there are two people in a room, you want the feeling of physicality. You want that sort of impression that there's not just floating heads, there are bodies underneath, and they might scratch themselves or shift position or gesture to make a point. And that's another big thing for me, is I can wallpaper scenes with sporadic cloth movement on either side just to suggest someone's in the room. It's actually random, but it's amazing how often it just exactly fits the dialogue. And it's that kind of thing. It's that kind of being prepared to let go of the literal and go for the abstract, which then creates a world which people believe in. And I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but it's a cognitive thing that humans do. We hear stuff and our ears turn it into something, and the narrative, it all blends, if it's done well.
I imagine in your job, no 2 days are the same, and you're working on, either a writing aspect or a sound aspect or whatever it might be. But you sort of go through approximately what your day or week sort of kind of looks like.
Well, it's funny, the evolution of the job, because when I was at the BBC, I was a producer, and a BBC producer is kind of the person who not only produces but then directs and then supervises post and so on. But the thing is, I started off as a studio manager at the BBC, so I was, a tape op, working or operating the soundboard and so on and so forth. So when I became a producer and was working light entertainment quite often after news headlines, for example, we were recorded at a Thursday lunchtime. Then I would go back to Broadcasting House with the tapes, which we would edit that afternoon for transmission that night. And John Whitehall, or the late, great John Whitehall, or another good SM would be in the room to edit them. And after a bit, I could save about half an hour on the edit if I did it myself, just because that was the amount of time I saved not telling John or someone, what I wanted to do. And, because they knew I had been an SM, they then were happy to go and have an afternoon having a cup of tea and reading the paper. So I started doing it myself quite early, even though I wasn't supposed to. It was, technically wrong. And then when we got into, I was learning digits, so I went to the Soundhouse studio in West London, where my dear friend, now retired Paul Dealey, and I did Superman, Batman, and so on. And I learned by watching Paul work with Pro Tools how digits worked and how Dolby Surround worked and so on and so forth. So having got all this information together, and also now writing much more than I did as a producer, because as a producer it was my job to bring on writers and quite write too at the BBC. Now I'm actually, kind of generating my own stuff and so on. And then come the point where I leave the BBC and go freelance in 1995. And I've got a family, 3 kids, and a mortgage to pay. I kind of I realized I'd have to do everything. So I'm now providing the whole menu from soup to nuts, and cooking it in the kitchen, and going out and buying it beforehand. And it becomes this sort of factory where you give me the job at the beginning and I hand you a CD at the end, or whatever it was in those days, So from being a sort of supervising people mainly sort of job, it became hands-on quite quickly. And then I ended up kind of doing everything from the writing part to the post-production part. And it's often occurred to me that it's pretty crazy to work that way, because really you never get a day off to think. And it's beginning to catch up with me a bit on Sandman, which is why now I'm beginning to become a producer again and delegate the sound design, as I have on Acts 2 and 3 of Sandman. So it kind of, it's changing as we talk about it. But if I take a sort of typical project from the last 25 years, generally speaking, the first over a 6-month period, let's say, sake of argument, the first 2 months of the writing, then there's about, up to a month in studio. And then there's another 3 months of post-production and then delivery. And it's quite funny because I'm working, I'm working on the computer in final draft if I'm generating scripts. Then I'm in the studio and pushing actors around and all of that stuff for a period of time. And then I'm back here and I'm trying to remember how the hell I work Pro Tools, because I've completely forgotten in that time. How did I do this? And so I have templates that I can always go back to. I remember where I was at that time. And it's a really quite amusing, in a sort of panicky way, to realize that I forget every other phase when I'm doing one or the other of these jobs. And so in the time before I'm going in with the actors, I'm freaking out about, oh God, I'm working with James next week, and James is really good and he really asks hard questions and I've really got to be on top of the material. All of this happens, and then I worry about the Pro Tools, and then I go back into writing again. I think, now how do I get dual dialogue on this page? So, it's kind of an experience of fear and trepidation, followed by remembering how I did it, and then more fear and trepidation, following remembering how I did it, and so on, until the job's done. And then I'm worried about, then I've got to find the next one.
So there you go. 5 great, amazing guests that we've had through Audiobook Club, and we hope to be bringing you more over the course of 2025. And I think that seems like a nice stepping off point for 2024, eh, Matt? We've had some great books. We gave out our awards last week to various authors and narrators for books we loved in 2024. By the way, I do have an honourable extra mention from Wordy Witterings on Blue Sky, who recommended Dominic Hoffman's reading of James by Percival Everett, saying it was a masterclass, absolutely brought the book to life. So thank you, Wordy Witterings on Blue Sky, for that. That's an honourable mention from last week's Best of 2024, when we asked you what you were listening to. But we are ringing the changes. It is a new year. And that does mean that we've got to ring the changes ourselves. It's time to hit the gym for at least 3 weeks of an annual subscription by reviewing Atomic Habits, Tiny Changes, Remarkable Results from James Clear, written and read by the author, 5.5 hours from Penguin Audio. Why did we choose this one, Matt? Because
the windmills in our mind are paved with good intentions, Steve.
I think you put it better than I ever could. Such is the way with our podcast. But that's it from us in 2024, Matt. It's been quite a year, eh?
It has, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, gentle listener, for putting up with us.
And now we'll let you go on to the best of 2024 and your other podcast feeds. We'll see you in 2025 when we're going to hit the gym, mentally speaking, with Atomic Habits. Until then, see you later. Take care. Ta-da.